and welcome to the Prime Factors Kata. The term kata is taken from martial arts, where the idea is you practice a sequence of moves over and over again so they become deeply ingrained and you don't have to think about them to use them. In a similar manner when programming, if you understand how to use your IDE in that way, where it's so ingrained you don't have to think about it, then it really gets out of your way and allows you to focus a lot more on solving the problem. Now in this case, don't focus on solving the problem. Please just focus on doing exactly as I do and using the shortcut keys that I use. This will help ingrain things as opposed to teaching you how to solve the problem of prime factors, which isn't really important to your day-to-day work. Instead, you will learn a simple test-driven development workflow you can follow. You will learn some Eclipse keyboard shortcuts, and you will also learn how to use the IDE to create a lot of your boilerplate code for you. That's very important because it saves you a considerable amount of time. I'm going to be working on a Mac today. If you're on Windows, substitute for most of these, just substitute Control for Command as far as the keys are concerned. And there's one other one which I may use, which is to expand and shrink your selection. On a Mac, it's fairly complex. It's Function, Control, Shift, Up, and Down arrows. On a Windows, very simple. It's Alt, Shift, Up, and Down arrows. And I'll speak to that when I get to it, assuming I actually use it. Okay, so let's head on over to Eclipse, which is going to be our IDE of choice for today's exercise. I'm using a couple of plugins here, which you might want to pause this and install them yourself. Actually, only one of them would be necessary for this. It is called MoreUnit. It contains several keyboard shortcuts for switching back and forth between your production code and your unit tests, as well as running your unit tests from different locations. The other one I'm going to use is called Show Shortcut Keys. You don't really need that one. That's purely for demonstration purposes of this exercise. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to type Command N, which is the shortcut for create new. It's a new wizard. We want a new Java project. Hit enter. Let's call this Prime Factors. And we'll take all the defaults. That looks good. Okay, we're going to create a JUnit test first. So once again, Command N, and JU should be enough for it to find it. There we are. Enter. Let's call this, well, let's give it a package first. How about com pillar technology, because that's where I am right now. And katas, I suppose. We'll give it a name of, well, prime factors test. And that should work. Yes, let us add the JUnit4 library to the build path. You can do this under properties build path later on if for some reason you missed this step when you're first creating your project. All right, here's our test class. Let's go ahead and modify the first test that it's created. We'll call it test 1 because we're going to test the number 1. Again, don't worry about solving the problem. And let's see, we'll do a lowercase a, capital E, followed by control space. That will give us some code recommendations. We do want assert equals, so we'll hit enter. Let's call for our expected a utility method called list, which we'll create momentarily. For our actual, we want to call the prime factors class, which doesn't exist yet, dot generate for the number 1. Okay, now let's remove the extra semicolon on the end here. Now the shortcut of interest here is command period. That will take us to the next compilation error, followed by command 1 to request a quick fix. Yes, we want to do exactly this. We want the list. This is a method that it's a utility method that's going to help us with our comparisons later. So let's have this return a list of type integer. We'll delete the boilerplate comment, and we're going to have it return arrays.asList. No parameter just yet. We're going to add that in later too. Okay, Command Shift O will organize the imports and add in arrays and list, which we need. And then we'll do command period again to go to the next compilation error, followed by command 1. Create class prime factors. Yes, that's exactly what we'd like to do. All the defaults are fine for this, so we'll just hit enter. Now the MoreUnit plugin allows us to hit Control J, which will jump between our test and our source. So once again, same workflow, control period to get the next compilation error, command period, followed by command 1. Yes, we want to create the method generate inside of here. This will also return a list of type integer. We will also delete the boilerplate comment. In this case, we're going to return just a new array list of type integer. Okay, let's go ahead and Command-Shift-O to organize our imports. And then another MoreUnit shortcut, which is Control-R, will run our tests. The test will run whether we're inside of our test class or our production class. And there we go. Test number 1 is now green. Control-J, to jump back to our test. There is a refactoring we can do here. Let's select this block of code, which is the list method, and we'll use Alt-Up arrow to move the whole block at once above that first test. That way we can keep adding tests to the bottom, which is a bit more natural to me. Okay, now to add our next test, just type the word test, and then hit Control Space twice. The first time gives us a list of content assist suggestions. The second time narrows that list down so that the top one will be JUnit 4, which is what we want. Okay, we're going to call this test 2. Very similar to the last one. So we type a lowercase a followed by uppercase E, and then Control Space, and that will give us assert equals, which is what we want as our suggestion. Hit Enter to accept it. We're going to call list, but this time with a parameter of 2. Hit Tab a couple of times to go to our actual, and we're going to call primefactors.generate again, but this time with 2. Primefactors.generate 2. Okay, now as you can see, we have a compilation error. So command period to go to that error, followed by command 1 to get a suggested fix. We don't want the first fix this time. In this case, we want to change the method to add a parameter. So we'll take that one. We don't want a single integer though. We want a variable argument list of capital I integers. So we'll say integer followed by 3 dots to get the ellipsis. We'll choose integers for our variable name because it's plural, which makes more sense. Delete the old one, and let's actually pass that to arrays.asList so we get an actual list back, which will contain essentially whatever we passed in as our parameter list. Okay, let's run our test. Control R, which should be read, and it is. And it should be read for the right reason, which is, yep, we got back nothing, and we expected 2. So Control J to jump to our production code. First things first is we need to start actually adding some prime numbers to this array list. So we'll select it, and I'm going to do a Command-Alt-L to extract local variable. We're going to call this primes. And let's use an if to actually add something to it. I'll say if I is greater than 1, then we're going to add the number 2 to primes. There we go. Control R to run our tests, which are now green. Okay, I don't see any refactoring opportunities here, so we'll do a Control J to jump back to our test code. You might have noticed it prompted me for which method to go to. I usually just hit enter and then use the mouse to move around. Now, I do see a refactoring opportunity here. We can turn this prime factors dot into a static import and make this look a bit cleaner. To do that, you want to be on the word generate. You want to be on the method name, not on the class name. And then you want to hit Command-Shift-M to create that import. It'll create a static import for us, which, as you can see, looks a little bit cleaner. Command-Shift-M. There we go. Just for kicks, we'll run our tests again. Control R. There we go. They are running just fine. And we're going to repeat the process for test 3. So type the word test, Control Space twice, enter. Follow that up with test 3. And again, I'm naming these for the number that we're testing. So we're testing the integer 2, we're testing the integer 3. I don't just use that pattern of test 1, test 2, test 3 for all the tests. These are actually meaningful names. Okay, so we're going to follow our pattern again. Lowercase a, capital E, Control Space. We'll accept assert equals. We're going to expect a list containing 3, and let's make our actual call, which now is just generate 3. Okay, Control R to run our tests. They are unsurprisingly red because we set it to 2, so we should have a pretty simple fix here. Let's go with primes, add I in this case. That should fix it, and it does. Okay, now Control J to jump back to our tests. Let's test 4 this time. Oops, let's do it from the right place. Must have tapped my trackpad there. Test, Control space twice. There we go. We're going to test 4. This is a little bit different. So lowercase a, capital E again, Control space. And this time, we're going to expect a list containing 2, 2. And for when we generate prime factors for the number 4. Okay, let's run our test. Should be red, and it is. It's complaining that we expected 2, 2, but it was 4, because all it's doing in our production code is adding I. Control J to jump to our code. In this case, we will need to add another if. So let's say if I modulus 2 is equal to 0, and if you didn't quite grok what that means, that's essentially saying that if I is evenly divisible by 2, so no remainder when you divide it. If it's evenly divisible by 2, we're going to add 2 to primes. So primes.add 2, and we're also going to need to then divide I by 2, so the next piece will work correctly. So I slash equals 2. Okay, oops, somehow it put an add all in there for me. We'll remove that. That should be add. There we go. Control R to run our tests, and we are again green. I don't see any refactoring opportunities here, so we'll just jump back to our test code. And back in our test, let's add the next one. Now, test 6, we could do it. It's not particularly interesting. Test 5 isn't either, so let me go through those. Test 5 would be, it's a prime number, just like 3 is, so we've really already handled that test case. Test 6, we've already handled when we get 2 numbers back, and we're already using I for the second one, so that's going to pass. So let's just go ahead and go to our next interesting test case, which is test 8. So once again, the pattern is type the word test, Control space twice, enter, test 8. We are going to assert equals, lowercase a, capital E, Control space enter, a list, this time containing 2, 2, and 2, so 3 times. 2 times 2 times 2. And that is for generate 8. Okay, let's run our test, which is unsurprisingly red because it got 2, 4 instead of 2, 2, 2. So let's jump to our production code, and we can change this if to a while and run our test. There we go. Now we should have a refactoring opportunity here, and we do. Why don't we change this while loop to a for loop? That should clean our code up a little bit. So we'll call this for. Notice that I'm refactoring only under green here. It's the only time you should change your implementation. And we can move this up in here, which is kind of the point of it. X, Command D to delete a line, an entire line, regardless of what is selected. Let's paste that in there. Okay, let's run our tests one more time to verify that we're green, and we are. Okay, let's jump back to our test code. And this is going to be our last interesting test. So test, Control space twice. Let's get our boilerplate in there. Test 9. We're going to lowercase a, capital E, Control space again. There we go. We're going to expect back a list containing 3 and 3 when we generate prime factors for the number 9. All right, Control R to run our test, and it will be red. There we go. We expected 3, 3, but it was 9 because the only divisor we look at is 2. So Control J to jump to our test source again. let's see, we want to, in this case, we're going to need to add a while loop around our for. But before we do that, let's extract this magic number of 2. I'll do this a slightly different way. Command-Alt-T brings up the refactoring menu on Mac. On Windows, that would be Alt-Shift-T. So you can see last time we used this extract local variable, which was Command-Alt-L. In this case, it's Command-Alt-T just to show us the whole menu. So you can see there's quite a bit more in there. If you only remember one keyboard shortcut for automated refactoring, that Command-Alt-T, or for Windows users, Alt-Shift-T, is the one to remember. Right, let's go ahead and extract this. We'll call this candidate. That'll put it there for us. Let's add our while loop. So while I is greater than 1, execute our for loop. Let's close this. Oops, typo there. We need to also increment candidate at this point, which we will do. I'm going to do a Command-Shift-F to format. That would be Control-Shift-F for Windows users. So it's nice and pretty. And let's go ahead and run our tests. And there we go, nice and green. I do see a refactoring opportunity or two in here, so why don't we put this initialization, this increment in here and make this into a for loop. So we'll start with that. Let's go ahead and grab this, Command X, and then Command D, because we don't need that anymore. Oops, convert this to a for while we're at it. Paste that in there. And let's move our incrementer down here. Command X to cut, Command D to remove the line. And we'll paste that up here. Control R to run our tests, which are nice and green. Now there's one other refactoring. You may notice that this condition should never be met, because up here on line 11 it says that we're going to continue this for as long as I is greater than 1, so it will certainly not be greater than 1 when we get down here. So that's not being executed anymore. Control R, run our tests, and we're still green. And that was the prime factors kata. Now the purpose of a kata, or the best way to use a kata, I should say, is to run it multiple times. Therefore, we are going to click here. You can right-click and delete. You can hit your delete key, what have you, but delete this, and don't forget to kill off the project contents on disk so you can do this again soon. Thank you much for joining.